I balanced the lemon pie on my forearm and nudged the church door open with my elbow. The hallway still smelled like wood polish and artificial roses. Graduation Sunday. Every spring the church hosted it, complete with speeches, certificates, a slideshow, and a potluck afterward. I wasn't on the slideshow. I never was. This year it was Devon's turn, my cousin on Mama's side, freshly graduated with a business degree. The whole family had shown up. Patrice wore her best silk dress. Aunt Lenora brought deviled eggs and enough perfume to outlast the sermon. I didn't get an invite, just a text. Vanessa, can you bring that lemon pie you made last year? The one with the graham cracker crust. That was it. No, we'd love to see you. No mention of seating. Just the assumption that I'd bring something sweet, like always. The fellowship hall was buzzing. Voices bounced off folding chairs and plastic tablecloths. I slipped through the side entrance and walked straight to the food table. My cousin Patrice spotted me first. "Oh, good you brought it," she said, taking the pie from my hands before I could speak. "We weren't sure if you'd have time. You're still working. At the hospital, right?" "Still am," I said, offering a smile that didn't quite reach. She nodded, but she was already turned towards someone else laughing about the floral arrangements. I looked around. Most tables had name cards. Devon's name was printed in gold, seated front and center. I found one in the back marked volunteers. I sat without asking. A few teens scrolled through their phones nearby, laughing at something I couldn't see. On the far end, 2 women in choir robes exchanged quiet remarks. "She's got what 3 degrees," one of them murmured. "Still shows up alone carrying dessert." "Social work," the other replied like the words were barely worth forming. Lord bless her heart. I heard every word, I always did. But I never turned around. There's a kind of stillness you learn when people talk about you like you're not there. You stay quiet. You survive the moment. I folded my hands in my lap and waited for it to pass. I had lived most of my adult life that way, present but never central. Quiet support, never the headline. At every holiday, someone asked if I'd ever try something else. "You're smart," Vanessa Uncle Floyd once said. "You could have been a lawyer or a professor or something real. You don't want to spend your whole life handing out Kleenex to strangers." Everyone laughed. No one asked who those strangers were. No one ever wondered why I chose this work, or how many people I'd stayed beside while they cried through a folded flag, or learned how to breathe without someone they loved. "Let's begin," Pastor Whitaker's voice boomed across the room. Conversation quieted. He welcomed the families, blessed the meal, and thanked the volunteers. Then came the graduates. Devon, of course, was called first. He strode up with swagger, flanked by camera flashes, and his mother's applause. Next came a high school senior headed to Georgetown, then a young woman entering med school. Each name was followed by cheers plaques, posed photos. I kept clapping. Then Pastor Whitaker paused. He set down his note cards and scanned the room. His eyes moved slowly across the crowd, resting for just a moment on my face. "Before we wrap up," he said, "I'd like to honor one more graduate, someone whose work has touched lives in this very community, though most of you may not realize it." A stir moved through the tables. A few heads turned. My cousin Patrice glanced back, brow furrowed. I held still. I didn't want to be seen. But the weight of his voice anchored me in place. The pastor continued. "Some degrees don't come with loud applause. Some work happens in silence. But today I'd like to shine a light on that kind of service." My stomach tightened. I wanted to disappear, and at the same time something in me hoped he would say my name. I didn't know why. Maybe because it had never been spoken from that pulpit before. Maybe because I had sat through dozens of ceremonies like this, invisible. The pastor looked right at me. His expression was calm. Sure. Gentle, but firm. "Vanessa Coleman," he said, "would you come forward?" A hush fell over the room. Someone dropped a fork. Chairs shifted. All eyes turned. I heard Patrice inhale sharply behind me. My feet didn't move, not at first. I wasn't frozen from fear, but from the unfamiliar weight of being seen. When I finally stood, I didn't rush. I didn't adjust my blouse or fix my posture. I just walked slowly, steadily toward the front. Each step felt like it echoed through years of being overlooked. As I passed my aunt's table, someone whispered, "What's this about?" My uncle sat stiffly, blinking like he didn't recognize me. I didn't speak. I didn't look for approval. I just kept moving. Pastor Whitaker stepped aside and gestured to the microphone. "The floor is yours," he said quietly. I looked out over the room. It felt like I was standing in a space that had never belonged to me until now. I hadn't prepared a speech. I hadn't planned to be heard. But for the first time in years, the silence didn't belong to them. It belonged to me. When I was 22, I sat across from a man who hadn't spoken a full sentence in 5 years. He was a Marine veteran, lost his wife, lost his leg, lost his will to exist, not in that order. He barely met my eyes. He refused the chair I offered. He didn't want therapy, he told me. Didn't believe in talking. I didn't push. I just stayed. And eventually in the quiet he whispered, "She used to hum a gospel song, right before she fell asleep. I haven't heard that sound in a long time." That was the first time I understood the work I had chosen. Not a job, not even a career. Just service. The kind you can't measure with paychecks or applause. But no one at home ever asked me about that. After Pastor Whitaker's announcement, the room fell into a hush so tight you could hear someone shifting in their seat 2 tables away. I felt eyes turning toward me. Patrice glanced back, her smile, now uncertain her expression, twitching with something between confusion and control. It's a look I've come to know, the one people wear when they sense the narrative is slipping from their hands. But I said nothing. I just sat there still and composed like I always did. 2 days earlier, I had been sitting in my car, halfway through a peanut butter sandwich on my lunch break, when the call came in. I almost didn't answer. The caller ID said private, but something told me to pick up. "Miss Vanessa Coleman," the voice said. "This is Pastor Whitaker. I hope I'm not disturbing your afternoon." I wiped my fingers on a napkin and told him he wasn't. He said he had attended a grief seminar at the VA hospital back in February. I hadn't known he was there. He told me, "You said something I've been turning over in my mind ever since. You said some people carry wounds so quietly, we forget they're bleeding." I didn't even remember saying it. He did. "Would you be willing to speak at Sunday's service?" he asked. "You may not have graduated this spring, but I believe you've earned the right to be heard." I didn't know how to respond. I hadn't stood at a microphone in front of people who knew me since I was a teenager. I had spent most of my life making sure I wasn't the center of anything. "I think the family already has things planned," I said, hesitant. He replied gently, "They don't need to know. Let this be between us and God." I said yes. I didn't tell anyone. In my family, respect was measured in promotions, property, and proximity to someone louder than you. Patrice became a nurse and immediately became everyone's pride. Devin got an internship and suddenly became the reason Aunt Lenora wore new jewelry to church. Me, I was the one who showed up with food and helped stack chairs afterward. I had never been on a program, never been quoted, never had anyone clap when I stood up. When I finished grad school, Mama just said, "Don't let it make you snobby." At the time, I laughed, but later it stayed with me. When my classmates celebrated with champagne and family photos, I ate takeout alone in my apartment. I told myself it was fine, that I didn't need validation, that maybe they just didn't understand what I did. But some days, I wished they had tried to. After the pastor called my name, I could feel my hands tingling. My body remained still, but inside something had shifted. That feeling you get when the current changes under the water, even if the surface hasn't yet moved. I stood slowly. I could hear whispers ripple through the room like wind. My uncle straightened in his chair. Patrice looked away. The teens stopped tapping their phones. I walked down the aisle with no papers in my hand, no applause, no escort. Just a quiet awareness that the air had thickened around me. The pastor met me halfway. He didn't say much, just a nod and a brief gesture toward the pulpit. I stepped forward, heart steady, not from pride but from clarity, from years of holding space for other people and finally realizing I could hold it for myself too. I looked out at the crowd, faces I had known my whole life, faces that had never once asked me what my days looked like, never wondered what I carried home from the hospital, or what it meant to sit with a widow who could no longer pray. I cleared my throat. "My name is Vanessa Coleman," I said, "and I work as a bereavement counselor for veterans and their families." There was no microphone squeal, no dramatic music, just silence and breath. Most of my work happens after the ceremonies, after the flags are folded, after the casseroles stop coming, after people start pretending the grief has expired. A few heads tilted. I've held hands in silence. I've watched men cry without knowing they were crying. I've stood beside women who buried both sons in the same month and still managed to make cornbread for their neighbors. I paused. then said it plainly. No one ever asks about that kind of work. Not in this family. Not in most families. A long silence followed. It wasn't hostile. It was just processing. I kept going. When I got my master's degree in social work, someone joked I was now qualified to talk to sad people. And they weren't wrong. I do talk to sad people. But I also remind them they're not alone, that pain isn't shameful, that healing doesn't need a crowd. I took a breath. I didn't come here to be celebrated. I came here because service isn't always loud. Sometimes it just stays. And then I stopped. I didn't need more words. I didn't need to explain my value. I didn't even need applause. Pastor Whitaker stepped beside me again. His voice was quiet but full of weight. That he said was the most important message spoken from this pulpit today. No one in that room knew I had been invited. Not a single family member. Not the cousins organizing the photo slideshow. Not Patrice, who had taken over the table placement. Not even Mama, especially not Mama. I had received the call quietly during my 15-minute break between grief consults and paperwork. I was sitting behind the hospice building in a patch of shade where the air smelled like cut grass and cotton scrubs. That was where Pastor Whitaker's number appeared on my phone. I didn't know it was him at first. His voice was steady and polite, but there was a softness in his tone like he already understood I wasn't used to being asked for anything other than a favor. He said he'd heard me speak at a private grief workshop back in February. I had no idea he had been in the room. You said something I wrote down, he told me. You said grief isn't a chapter. It's the paper the whole story is printed on. I blinked. I didn't even remember saying that. He asked me if I would speak at the church's graduation Sunday service. I know you didn't just graduate, he said, but you've crossed thresholds most people don't see. That deserves a voice. I didn't answer right away. It had been years since someone asked me to speak publicly, and never like this. Never from the pulpit. I used to sit under every Sunday as a child, where I was taught to cross my legs, keep quiet, and let the spotlight pass. I said yes, but only after a long pause. I told him I didn't want it to become a family thing. He said that's why I didn't tell them. So I came, quietly. I brought the pie they asked for. I wore a blouse they wouldn't comment on. I sat in the back like I always had. Let them seat me near the folding chairs and pretend my degree wasn't real, that my life wasn't legitimate because it didn't come with a house, a husband, or a hashtag. They joked I was good at counseling, but terrible at living. No one knew what I did in the spaces they never thought to enter. And now I was walking toward the pulpit. When the pastor called my name, I felt the air go dense like the whole room had been holding its breath, and didn't know why. The chairs creaked. A fork dropped. Someone whispered, "Did she finish school again or something?" I heard Patrice say my name just barely, not with anger, more like disbelief. I walked past her table without looking down. I didn't need permission. Not anymore. When I reached the stage, Pastor Whitaker smiled, but he didn't say much. He stepped aside like this moment had been waiting for me longer than either of us realized. I didn't fumble with notes. I hadn't written any. What I had to say had already been living in my chest for years. The microphone was warm. That surprised me. The room was quiet. I looked out across the pews at the faces that had watched me grow up, but never grow into anything. To them, I was always that smart girl who liked books too much and wore flats instead of heels. They assumed that because I wasn't loud, I must not be strong. That because I didn't come home with rings or baby pictures, my life was somehow on pause. They didn't see what I carried. My name is Vanessa Coleman, I said, and I work in grief. Specifically, I help families and veterans process loss, both the kind that's named and the kind they can't quite explain. I scanned the room. They were listening, really listening. For 15 years, I've been sitting across from people who don't want to talk but need to, who feel like saying the pain out loud will break them, and sometimes it does. But then, they realize they can still breathe after the crack. A woman near the third row nodded slowly. I continued. I don't have a trophy wall. I've never made more than $52,000 in a year. But I have watched people come back to life after saying goodbye to the one who meant everything. And I count that as a win. There was no applause. Not yet. But no one was fidgeting anymore. My degree, I said, was never about climbing a ladder. It was about building a ladder under someone else who forgot how to stand. That line, I felt it settle. I saw it in the way Patrice slowly lowered her eyes, in the way Aunt Lenora clutched her purse just a little tighter. in the way Devin leaned forward like he wasn't sure if he should be proud or ashamed. I told him about the time I sat with a teenage girl whose brother had overdosed. How she stayed silent for an hour before whispering, "I don't know how to go to school now. He used to pick my outfits." I told them about the widow who made me tea after her own husband's funeral because she was worried I looked cold. I told them these things not for pity, but for weight, so they could see what my quiet life carried. I didn't come here to be honored, I said. I came because Pastor Whitaker asked if I would speak, and I realized no one else ever had. I stepped back. That was it. The pastor returned to the pulpit, his eyes damp. He didn't try to summarize what I said. He didn't need to. "Thank you, Sister Coleman," he said, like he'd said it 1,000 times before. Like I had always belonged there. Then he turned back to the crowd. And the crowd was different now. They just didn't know it yet. I didn't come here to be seen. That's what no one in that room understood. Not Patrice, who blinked at me from the third table like her lens had fogged. Not Devin, who shifted in his chair like the cushion had turned on him. Not Aunt Lenora, who clutched her fork so tightly you'd think I'd stolen her script. I wasn't there to outshine anyone. I wasn't even supposed to be on the program. That's what made this moment feel so strange, not because I was in it, but because it was the first time they couldn't edit me out. The applause was soft at first, almost hesitant. A few claps from the back, then it caught. Not wild, not overwhelming, but real, respectful. Like people were clapping not just for the words they heard, but for something heavier they hadn't known they'd been carrying until I gave it a name. I stepped down from the pulpit without looking back. My shoes made soft, slow taps across the polished floor. I didn't make eye contact with anyone. That wasn't pride. It was clarity. I had said what needed to be said. I had no interest in seeing what they did with it. Pastor Whitaker met me halfway. His expression was warm but steady. He didn't offer congratulations. Just touched my arm and said, "Thank you for staying the course." That meant more to me than a standing ovation ever could. I gave a quiet nod, then walked past the row of tables to where I'd left my purse beneath a folding chair. Patrice was whispering to someone when I passed her. I didn't catch the words, but her voice had changed lower, more deliberate. Not the chirping tone she used when she was in control of a room, something more cautious. She saw me. She opened her mouth like she was about to say something, but nothing came out. That was fine. Silence had always been my language. I stepped aside as the luncheon began. Long tables lined with casseroles and serving spoons. Deviled eggs, sweet tea, foil-wrapped banana bread. I wasn't hungry. I stood near the corner where the coat racks met the exit door, watching people fill their plates and try to return to normal. A man I didn't know approached me with a small nod. "I lost my wife last spring," he said. "Wish I'd met someone like you then. Might have made it through cleaner." I didn't say anything at first. Then I offered him a quiet thank you. That's all some people need: witness, not rescue. A woman from the choir stopped to ask if I could speak at their next gathering. "Not everyone wants to hear about grief," she said, "but we do, because it's real, and it doesn't care if we're ready or not." I agreed, no hesitation. She didn't ask me to shorten my words. She didn't ask for credentials, just presence, and that's all I ever wanted to give. In the back, I saw Devin sitting with his plate untouched. His mother leaned toward him, whispering too sharply for it to be casual. His posture had changed, less proud, more still. He wasn't looking at his awards or the banner with his name. He was looking in my direction, not with envy, just uncertainty, as if he was trying to figure out how someone he had never once celebrated could make a room feel like this. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to explain my job, the number of times I was told I should have gone into nursing, that I was too sensitive, that social work wasn't a real career, that funerals were too heavy for someone like me. I thought about all the events I showed up to just to take photos or refill punch, or be the warm, quiet body they could seat near the back without anyone asking why I didn't bring a +1. But today was different. I hadn't demanded it. I hadn't corrected them. I had simply stood when asked and told the truth. From the far side of the room, Patrice stood up. She walked slowly, holding a paper napkin in one hand, her plate in the other. When she reached me, she didn't smile right away. That surprised me. Instead, she looked like someone who had just found an old photo in a box and couldn't figure out when it had been taken. "That was unexpected," she said. Not sarcastic, just honest. I tilted my head. Was it? She paused. You never said any of that before. About what you do, about the people. No one ever asked, I replied. She nodded slowly, then cleared her throat. I didn't realize you were doing all that. I didn't respond. Sometimes the apology is in the pause. She looked like she wanted to say more, but someone called her name from across the room, and she stepped away. I exhaled, not from tension, from release. I stayed 10 more minutes, long enough to hear the laughter return to the room, long enough to know the ceremony had continued, but something had shifted. Maybe not forever, but enough. Then I picked up my purse, walked out without grabbing a plate, and didn't say goodbye. Some exits don't need closure. Some exits are the closure. I didn't tell anyone I was leaving. No polite wave, no final photo, no standing in line for banana pudding. I walked through the side exit the same way I came in, quiet, unnoticed by most, and finally unbothered by it. The sun outside had softened. That hazy Georgia light hung over the church lawn like steam from the pavement, thick and golden. I moved slowly, not out of hesitation, but because I was allowing myself to feel something I hadn't in years. Peace. My car was parked beneath the sycamore tree, same spot I always chose, far enough not to be noticed, close enough not to be forgotten. The door creaked slightly when I opened it. Inside, the air smelled like the lemon pie I had delivered earlier, the one they barely thanked me for. I sat behind the wheel and didn't start the engine right away. I needed a moment to breathe, to let the stillness settle in my chest before life pulled me into its next duty. Then my phone buzzed. One text. It was from Devin. I didn't know. I should have. That was something. You made us all think. Thank you, cousin. I stared at the screen. Devin, the cousin who once said I wasted my degree. Devin, who had bragged about his business school acceptance and told me I'd probably end up running group therapy for cats. That Devin. I didn't reply right away, but I did smile just slightly. Sometimes acknowledgement doesn't need to be perfect, just true. I started the car and pulled out slowly. The road back to my apartment was familiar, lined with trees I'd passed for years, but never looked at long enough to appreciate. That's what life in the background teaches you: how to observe without expectation, how to notice without needing to be noticed. At the first red light, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Patrice. I'm thinking about what you said. I guess I never asked because I thought I already knew. That one hit deeper, because that was the core of it, wasn't it? They never asked, not because they didn't care, but because they assumed they already knew my story. Quiet woman, soft job, no ring, no housewarming, no Facebook-worthy announcements. To them, I was background, a blur that blended between louder lives. But the truth is, you can't know someone you don't listen to. And for years, they didn't even try. I drove the rest of the way in silence. No music, just the hum of the tires and the rhythm of release. The apartment felt calm when I walked in. A low hum from the AC. My books stacked neatly on the end table. I changed into soft clothes, warmed up leftover soup, and sat by the window as the sun began to pull its light from the edges of the city. That's when I opened my laptop. There were 3 new emails. One from the VA support group asking if I'd consider speaking again for new staff orientation. One from the local community college asking if I'd be open to a guest lecture on trauma-informed care. And one from the pastor himself. Miss Coleman, thank you again. Today you gave us all something that will outlast applause. I meant it when I said you delivered the most important message of the day. May we continue to learn from your silence, your service, and your truth. I read it twice. Then I closed the laptop and sat still, because that right there was the moment. Not when I stood at the pulpit, not when they clapped, not when Devin texted, but now, alone, in my own space, holding a piece I didn't have to earn through performance. That was the real reward. They said my degree was useless, that I had wasted time, potential, money, effort, that I wasn't doing anything real. But today, none of them could deny the weight of what I carried. Not because I raised my voice, but because for once they finally heard it. And what they heard wasn't volume, it was truth. I looked out the window and saw a neighbor helping her elderly father into a car. She opened the door, adjusted his seatbelt, and touched his shoulder before walking around. That to me is what my work has always been about. Quiet care, witnessing, offering presence where people forget it's needed. And so I stayed in that window seat until the sun dipped low enough to turn the walls golden. I didn't post about it. I didn't relive the moment through 1,000 retellings. I just let it live, let it settle, let it belong to me. Because some stories aren't for spectacle. Some victories aren't designed for noise. Sometimes the only revenge worth taking is standing in your truth so completely no one can erase you without exposing their own silence. And I didn't need a microphone to do that. Just a moment. And a pulpit I never asked for, but never forgot. What stays with me is not the recognition, it's the years she held her worth in silence and the strength it took to speak only when it mattered most. If you saw yourself in this story, hit subscribe to keep hearing kindness echo after heartbreak.